Welcome to Digging for Truth. I'm Scott Lanser, the Director of Associates for Biblical Research, and I'm here today with my co-host and my friend, Henry Smith. Hi, Henry. Good to have you here today in the studio.
It's great to see you.
Yes,
good to be together again.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's been a while since Henry and I were together in studio, and we're just excited to talk about an important topic. I say excited because it is important, but it is not an exciting subject. And in fact, we're just going to let parents out there know we're going to be touching on a very sensitive subject. And it's the issue of the overturning of Roe versus Wade. And right off the bat, we want to say that questions come to people's minds almost immediately. They say, well, isn't ABR a ministry that deals with biblical archaeology? Why are you talking about this? And the reality of it is biblical archaeology and biblical history give us some unique perspective on this entire subject, because this very, very sad matter has a long and deep historical basis. And so we do talk about this. And Henry, I remember you had published articles some years ago in Bible and Spade. We were showing the relationship between child sacrifice and a modern day abortion. And I think we have touched on that, and those subjects are very important.
Yeah, that's right, Scott. So yeah, the sort of the bigger question you're touching on, the audience member would be asking, why are you addressing this? Mm-hmm. The first issue is exactly that. There is a historical, archaeological connection. We want to encourage people to go back and watch those episodes of Digging for Truth where you and I discuss the archaeology. We also talk about the biblical texts that discuss the issue of humanity, the continuum of human identity from conception really into eternity. Or at least in this world, from conception to death, that the person is fully human, and how the Bible teaches all of that. The other main reason why we want to talk about it is not only the historical archaeological connections in the big picture, but this is such a important worldview topic.
Yes.
Because it's connected to larger issues that the church in America is planted in the middle of and is dealing with in terms of worldview ideas, pressures that are infiltrating the church, that are coming upon the church, that a lot of people are not aware of, or at least in the particulars, and how they all relate to one another. So why are we talking about it? Those are some of the reasons why.
That's right. Well, these worldview issues, we're going to be getting into some of them, very directly. But, some people claim on the subject of abortion, they'll say, well, the Bible doesn't ever address that subject, or they'll say that Jesus never talked about it. Why are you talking about it? Maybe you could just share some insights about that, and why that's problematic to have that perspective.
Yeah, you'll even see this in the church, which is very disturbing and bothersome. It's taking a truthful point, which is often the case when it comes to distorting truth, and that is the Bible doesn't talk about the subject of abortion with that word per se, right? And Jesus doesn't address it directly in terms of his earthly ministry. But does the Bible address the subject? Well, yes, it does. In its scope, in its teaching about humanity. As I mentioned in the intro, is that, or initial thoughts, the human beings are human from conception. The Bible teaches this clearly, and we see that science has caught up with the Bible, right? That each person has their own unique DNA code right from conception, right from the very beginning, which is what's inferred from Scripture. And so, does the Bible address this issue? It does, in terms of its scope of teaching about humanity, the continuum of human identity. The only instance where individuals acting outside the purview of the state are allowed to take another life is in the terms of self-defense. It's the only scenario that we're permitted to take the life of another person as an individual. And so all of these issues are interconnected. So does the Bible speak about the issue? It speaks very loudly about the issue.
Yes.
It doesn't use the term, but the person that argues that it doesn't use the term is misleading. And we're going to talk about a lot of misleading because a lot of that is going on. The second thing I want to address is the question of Jesus. Now, we've talked about the authority of Scripture on this program many times, and that Jesus and Scripture are equal founts of authority.
Yes.
When Scripture speaks, God speaks. And when God speaks, Christ speaks. So if Christ is not speaking about something in his earthly ministry, he's speaking about it in the Old Testament, he's speaking about it through Paul or Peter or James or Jude or whoever it may be. It is the Spirit of Christ speaking in Scripture. So to say that Jesus doesn't deal with the issue is also misleading.
Yes, yes. And we're going to be calling out a lot of this sort of deceptive commentary that's out there.
Yes.
But this one particularly affects believers because it's Christians sometimes that reason this way.
Yes.
Well, Jesus doesn't talk about it. Or they say, oh, we probably shouldn't talk about it. That's not compassionate. We're going to touch on that one as well.
Yes.
These are things that we need to be careful of and we need to be warned about. Now, quickly here, Henry, the reality of the overturning of Roe versus Wade means that it's been turned back to the states. We, again, hear another line of deception out there in the current discussions and through media that it means that abortion has been fully overturned in America.
Right.
And that's just not the case.
Yeah, just very much a civics 101 kind of thing. You know, as Christians, we need to have some basic understanding of how our legal system works in the United States. I mean, we don't need to be experts, but you don't have to be an expert to understand that before Roe v. Wade was ruled in 1973, that the states regulated abortion and wrote laws related to either legalizing it or criminalizing it or not allowing it or whatever the case may have been in the individual states. Roe v. Wade overrode that authority, and the Supreme Court in recent times has simply said that that was bad law and that we're returning the authority back to the states on the issue. So it's not overturning it or making it illegal. It's saying the individual states will determine how this is going to be regulated, how it's going to be dealt with in those individual commonwealths. So to say that it's been, outlawed is just simply untrue, and it's Civics 101.
That's right. All right. Well, we are so glad that you've joined us today for this very sobering and important conversation about abortion and life. And we'll be back in just a few minutes to continue our discussion.
In a culture of intense Bible-denying skepticism, Associates for Biblical Research exists to strengthen followers of Jesus by affirming the authority of the Bible. Our archaeological fieldwork and original research form a strong foundation in upholding the reliability of the Scriptures. For students or anyone asking if they can really trust the Bible, please visit our website and partner with us by joining our prayer team or financially supporting this ministry. And thank you for standing with us.
Welcome back to Digging for Truth. I'm here today with Henry Smith, and Henry and I are discussing a most important subject, and it has to do with the overturning of Roe versus Wade and what that means for us as Christians and what it means for us in terms of worldview. And we're going to be discussing worldview ideas today that are the backdrop of why our culture has, moved in the direction of supporting abortion in many ways. We certainly hope that trend will stop. We certainly have seen in just recent times, since Roe versus Wade was overturned, we've seen a lot of energy being poured back into this issue to try to push America in that direction towards accepting abortion as a legitimate thing. But we need to dissect it a little bit, don't we, Henry? We've got to break the language down. I just should add that, in my own experience, I spent many, many years before I was a pastor and then after I became a pastor in working in pro-life work. It's close to my heart. I know it's close to your heart. But the bottom line is here, we can't just talk about generalities. We have to talk about the specifics, the meaning of words. What are the roots of philosophically of this movement? Maybe you could help us with that.
Yeah. So we're going to enter into a discussion of a lot of twisted language. And one of the things is, when you think about twisted language, you think about the ultimate twister of languages, and that is the serpent. Yeah. Did God really say? Right, is the sort of the first twisting of language that occurs in the garden. In fact, you get the impression from that narrative, the way that Satan jumbles it all around, is that God has prohibited Adam and Eve from eating anything in the garden, is the way that it's distorted. So the twisting of language is ultimately a spiritual issue.
Yes, it is.
Now, one of the things we want to talk about is the underlying worldview that's happening when language is twisted. And one of the things that we think influences the culture greatly in the last 200 years is Marxism. Marxism is dependent upon the distortion of language. And in fact, Lenin, said, basically adopted maximum tactical flexibility in terms of putting forth Marxism. So if you had to lie, you had to murder, you had to cheat or steal to bring forth the vision of Marxism, it didn't matter, because that was the ultimate goal. You see that in Nazi Germany as well. Now, I'm not using those examples to be extreme in the sense of calling people those things, but the distortion of language for the ultimate achievement of a particular goal is really influenced in many ways by Marxist thought.
Yes.
And that's a major problem in our culture, and a lot of people don't see that that's what's happening.
Yeah, and it's very sad if some of our young people have not been brought up with a good civics education, don't understand some of these ideas, they don't understand what Marxism is, they don't even know they're being swept right over the waterfall with all of the lies and all of the nonsense. And it's so often I try to reach out to young people because you've got to understand the terms. You got to understand what you're embracing. Well, let's talk about how this is connected to the sexual revolution.
Yeah, you can't talk about the issue of abortion without connecting it to these larger worldview issues.
Yeah.
And certainly what we can look at historically is the 1960s has a big role to play in this. The sexual revolution, liberating people from the consequences of sexual behavior outside the covenant of marriage between husband and wife. That's really what's happened culturally. So what does abortion do? Well, one of the things it does is frees people, or it seems to free people. It actually doesn't.
Right.
It actually enslaves them from a standpoint of sin and their relationship with God. But it seems to free them from the consequences of this behavior. Now, this is a lie that's been perpetrated on the culture. A lot of us have absorbed it. I know before I was saved, I absorbed some of it in various ways. So it's very bewitching. But we can never divorce the issue itself from the broader context of the larger cultural forces that have been taking place. The destruction of the family, the expansion of the welfare state, its effect on the family, taking away the consequences of human sexual behavior. It's all sort of interrelated together. And as the church, we need to understand it's a matrix of things that's happening in the culture.
Ultimately, many of these attacks are attacks on the human family.
Yes.
And the family unit, and about whether or not you should want children or not. I mean, it's as basic as that.
Yes.
Do you want children? Are children good to have, or is it better for you to live your life in absolute raw freedom? And as you said, in this pursuit of freedom, they brought in this idea of killing a baby in order to give you more freedom. And of course, that leads to more, well, it leads to a destruction of soul, is what it does. It harms you. Yeah. It harms you. It harms the mother. It harms people, these sorts of things.
Yes.
Well, quickly, Henry, let's talk about how this is related to the worship of self and this ideology, or this idolatry, I should say, of personal autonomy.
Yeah, sort of, if you want to say it, Scott, in the old days, maybe we look in the Old Testament or the New Testament, we often see the worship of false gods, right? Some people worship themselves. You think of kings like Nebuchadnezzar, for example, or the king of Babylon, kings in the book of Daniel, and that sort of thing. But today it's sort of shifted. It's not idols that you carve out and put in your room per se. It's it's autonomy. It's personal autonomy. It's saying, not only do I want to be liberated from the consequences of any of my actions, I have lordship, capital L, over the life of another human being, to the point where I can kill that other human being. So it's the ultimate expression of power in terms of wickedness, to take the life of another person. Other than blaspheming against God himself, there is no greater crime than murdering another human being. There's no greater crime. It's the attempt to throw God off as Lord and make the self Lord. And so that is the thing that we're dealing with. We're dealing with idolatry. The idolatry of self.
And Jesus warned us very directly to never harm a child. And he said there's very, very serious consequences to harming a child. So we have to keep these things in mind as we consider this whole subject. Well, thank you for joining us today. I do know this is a sobering subject, but very, very important. We're so glad you've joined us, and we'll be right back.
Bible in Spade is a non-technical quarterly publication published by the Associates for Biblical Research. Written from a scholarly and conservative viewpoint, Bible in Spade supports the inerrancy of the biblical record and is a must-read for both the serious Bible student and anyone asking if they can really trust the Bible. Archaeological evidence, properly interpreted, upholding the history of the Bible. Subscribe today at BibleArchaeology.org.
Digging for Truth is produced and recorded in the studios of Lighthouse TV, positively different television.
Welcome back to Digging for Truth. I'm here today with Henry Smith, and Henry and I are discussing the really serious and important topic of abortion and the overturning of Roe versus Wade. And we've been just delving into some of these issues. And this is the first show of 2 on this subject. And I think our audience will just find this discussion important, encouraging. And again, it is something that is, it's hard to talk about in many ways, isn't it, Henry?
Yeah, it is, and yet at the same time, when we think about our show, Digging for Truth, we use that as a metaphor in some ways, literally in archaeology. But we want to know the truth of the matter when it comes to this, and getting at the truth. Getting at the truth in terms of language, Scott, we mentioned in a previous segment about the twisting of language, right? Let's talk about that a little bit. So we have these phrases that are floating out there that the church needs to be much more discerning about. Language.
I think this subject of the twisting of language is one of the most important things to talk about for evangelical people, for believers, but for anyone who may be watching today. Understand how language is being hijacked and twisted. So go ahead.
So a lot of terminology we're going to talk about here and into the next episode. So we have the subject, we call this the choice, or the right to choose. And we're going to talk about, we're going to break that down a little bit. But so we have this choice. Now, the idea of choice on the surface sounds like, oh, that's a good idea. You want freedom to make choices, right? And as a general principle, that's not it's a morally neutral kind of thing. It's free to make choices. I'm free to marry who I would want to marry in terms of as long as it relates to God's moral law, or I'm free to I have the choice of eating a hamburger, or whatever the case may be.
It's tied in directly to this idea that we talk about personal autonomy. It feeds that.
Right, but when it gets outside those bounds into autonomy, we're talking about, well, what is it we're choosing?
Yeah.
So it's a euphemism designed to cover over what abortion actually is.
Right.
And that involves the dismemberment, the disembowelment, the decapitation, or the burning, if it's a saline abortion, of another human being.
Yeah.
So when we use the word choice, it's a euphemism disguised to cover that gruesome reality.
Yes.
And as the church, we need to, that needs to be our foundation. What is it we're talking about?
Yeah.
If we're talking about the word choice, that's the choice we're referring to.
That's right. That's right. And of course, we would encourage people to always choose life. Yeah, there's always a choice,
right,
but we choose life. And for some who are involved, who are in women who are in circumstances where they have a pregnancy, maybe they're scared, and many things come in to this whole matter. We are not in any way playing down all the realities of what that means, but certainly being honest about your choices. That's what we're talking about here.
Right.
Yeah, there is personal autonomy, there's choices we make, but God says that we are responsible and accountable for our choices. Right. It is not like we make a choice and then it doesn't mean anything, or it doesn't matter. Just do what you want to do. Just do what makes you happy. That's some of the worst advice you could ever give anyone.
Well, and it assumes that the human beings are just operating in this sort of vacuum.
Yeah.
That it doesn't have anything to do with God, because we've constructed ourselves as gods.
Yeah.
So the only person that has to deal with the consequence is me, and if I determine it to have no consequence, it doesn't matter. So, so when we use this language of choice, that's really what we're talking about, choosing.
Yeah.
And we need to be honest about that, and stop playing the language game. Don't accept the premise of the argument. I think that's the thing in the church that we must stop doing.
Yeah.
Don't accept the premise.
So when it's tied to the my body, my choice thing, how do you respond to that?
Yeah, it's the same. It's the same kind of thing. In fact, I can tell you a story. When this whole thing with Roe versus Wade was overturned, it became time to talk to our daughter about this. To explain the basic structures of what this is about and what the story is about. So I was explaining to her some of these deceptive language. I didn't even give content to this. I just said, this is something that they say, my body, my choice. And immediately, 11-year-old said, it's not your body. That's what she said to me. In 1 second, I didn't try to lead her into that. I didn't try to make that argument first. I said, here's what they say. And that was her response. And of course, that's the correct response, because that is the existential reality of the situation. Not only biblically, which is very clear, but scientifically.
Yes.
It's irrefutable now. It's irrefutable. Science is caught up with the Bible. This is a distinct, individual, separate human being with DNA that's unique. Not only unique, no person in the history of the universe will ever have that uniqueness before or ever again. That's how unique this individual person is. So this euphemism, my body, my choice, is a lie. And we have to call it, that's what it is.
Yes. What about the concept, Henry, of my rights? I have a right to this.
Yeah, it's good. I think we'll wrap up this episode with that and then pick up on it in the next episode.
Yeah.
We need to think about what rights are in terms of, first of all, from a worldview perspective. If you're an atheist and the world just made itself, then how are rights? How do we derive rights of anything? We just make up any right we want to. I mean, somebody can say, I have the right to go kill somebody. I have the right to steal from somebody. I have any right I want to. So we have to understand that rights come from God.
Right.
Okay, and then of course we have to understand okay, well, what rights has God communicated to us?
Yes.
And I would say the basic structure of that is found it's expressed throughout the Bible, but the basic structure of it is found in the Ten Commandments.
Yes, and we'll definitely be picking up on that in our second show on this important subject. And we are so glad that you've joined us today. Want to remind everyone that God offers grace and salvation to every person. We are all sinners, and we all need the grace of God. This subject is tender, it's important, but we want you all to know that God's grace is available for each and every one of us. Thank you for watching us today on Digging for Truth.